Hello to everyone. I wanted to thank AmChem for organizing this conference on innovation in Thessaloniki. My name is Peter Chresanthakes. I represent Anatolia College. We're excited to be a member of this development as the premier nonprofit private educational institution in Thessaloniki. We have a major role to play in all of our academic divisions. And today we have a former trustee with us who gives me great pleasure to introduce. Jamie Merisotis is a globally recognized leader in philanthropy, education, human work and talent development, and public policy. He has been the president and CEO of Lumina Foundation since 2008. That's one of America's largest private foundations. He's served on multiple presidential and congressional commissions on tertiary education. He's also the author of 2 acclaimed books, the most recent being HumanWork in the Age of Smart Machines. Jamie, I read that book in one day. It was a great book. We're going to discuss that. He's an innovator and a thought leader sought after by many U.S. and international media entities. His writings have appeared in many media outlets, including the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and others. He serves on many international boards and foundations, and one of my favorites is the Children's Museum of Indianapolis. It's the world's largest children's museum, and I've had the pleasure to visit that museum when you and I last met. Jamie, it's a pleasure having you here, and I turn over the floor to you at this time, and then we'll continue our conversation after your opening remarks.
Ready, stop, Peter, and Kalispera. I'm really delighted to be here. And I want to begin by saying I'm really proud of my Greek heritage. My family immigrated to the U.S. from Crete on my mother's side and northern Greece, actually mostly Thessaloniki on my father's side. So, I'm really proud to be a part of this. I have the sincere honor, as Peter pointed out, of having previously served on the board of Anatolia, the celebrated tradition of serving as a bicultural institution of learning at Anatolia, I think is really important. So this event obviously holds a special place in my head and my heart. This first Future Thinking Dialogues, I think, is a fitting series for the American Hellenic Chamber of Commerce, because I think you're focusing not only on today, but also on tomorrow. And I've noted some of the important work that the American Hellenic Chamber has already undertaken. For example, the Women in Business Committee's recent bicultural webinar on the effects of the pandemic on women in the workforce and the importance of well-being. My own career has been global, working as an advisor in the U.S., in Southern Africa, Europe, and other parts of the world. And it's always focused on making this learning and working intersection more inclusive to literally serve more people better. And I'd note that Greece is one nation that's done reasonably well in the race to improve talent to meet rising demand. If you look at the 2018 OECD report called Education for a Bright Future in Greece, Greece has improved the educational attainment of 25 to 34-year-olds over the last decade, with 41% of this cohort having completed tertiary education, which is roughly in line with the OECD and EU 22 averages. The report goes on to say that high-quality education is a key for boosting well-being in Greece in the future. Similarly, improving higher education is Lumina Foundation's mission. Our mission is not international. It's solely focused on the U.S., but we take our global responsibility seriously, and by that I mean the responsibility to learn from others and to contribute our knowledge to our partners and friends around the globe. In 2008, we began working as a national advocate and catalyst for the goal that 60% of Americans have a high-quality degree, certificate, certification, or other credential by 2025, a number that stood at 38% at that point. Today, while we still have a way to go, we stand at 52%. In other words, Americans have earned 12 million more credentials net than when we started. I believe that creating learning that's accessible, that's lifelong, and that prepares everyone for a rapidly changing global future is imperative, which in part is what drove me to write that recent book that Peter mentioned on human work. And as I worked on the book, I concluded that there's a question that we all need to answer that's getting more urgent every day. And that question simply is, why are we as nations, as communities, so focused on this thing we call education? What's it really for? And, pondering that question started me on an exploration of the work of the future. And I say work of the future rather than future of work, even though many people use those terms interchangeably. I prefer work of the future because I think we have to acknowledge that learning is important and work matters. And when people say future of work, I think at least some of them are questioning the basic idea of whether work itself is important or meaningful. And I think they're wrong, and here's why. Over the last decade or so, I've seen an almost obsessive focus on the so-called future of work in the international media and academic studies and books and in policy discussions. And frankly, most of them fall into what I've been calling the robot zombie apocalypse camp. The dominant narrative is one where there's massive job loss, fueled by rapid advances in artificial intelligence. But at the end of the day, we know that technology's always played a role in both job creation and job destruction. It's possible that technology could very well create millions of new jobs, as it always has in the past. But that doesn't mean that things are not different this time, because they are different. And we need to pay attention to how and why they're different, because the work of the future will change almost everything we take for granted about jobs and employment. And I think it has enormous implications for what we today call higher education at all levels. What's different is the tasks that humans will need to perform, as well as what people expect from the work that they're performing. Now, think for a moment about what happened to jobs in the US, Europe, and around the world before COVID. For decades, we've seen an enormous increase in the demand for skills across almost all occupations. And here in the US, this shift was accelerated by the Great Recession of 2008, 2010, and its aftermath, and is continuing today. The most obvious impact has been an increase in the value of university or college degrees. According to the Georgetown University Center on Education and the Workforce, more than 5 million jobs for Americans with a high school education or less disappeared and never came back. Meanwhile, jobs requiring some college or an associate degree took a hit during the recession, but then grew steadily. Those requiring a bachelor's degree actually went up during that recession and have continued to rise for the last decade. Indeed, in March of this year, there were over 900,000 new jobs created in the US, but only 7,000 of those 900,000 new jobs, less than 1%, went to people with only a high school diploma. It's also worth underscoring that the number of good jobs, those that pay meaningful wages and offer things like healthcare, retirement, and other benefits, has been shifting to people with higher levels of education for a long time. In total, the number of good jobs has increased and continues to do so, but not everyone is benefiting. Those with only a high school education are being left behind. So these trends explain why the US economy can look so strong on average, but leave many people feeling like their standard of living is deteriorating. You know, they feel that way because it's true. So most of these conversations about the future of work, I think, largely overlook or understate how less skilled workers, including here in the US, many Black, Indigenous, and workers of color, are being disproportionately impacted, particularly in industries like healthcare, retail, and hospitality. Of course, these are the very people who've been hit hard by the pandemic. So while there will be, I think, many good jobs to be had in the coming years, they will be different jobs, and they will require higher levels of knowledge and skills across the board. All jobs are changing, and people need to change along with them, or they'll be left behind. So as technology advances, we should assume that any task that's repetitive and predictable, mental tasks as well as physical ones, will eventually be performed by a machine. So, at its simplest, human work is the work that only humans can do. In other words, it's work in which the people performing it are actively engaged in responding to their environments. Because the landscape for human work is dynamic, it isn't repetitive, and it's much more difficult to automate. Artificial intelligence and other technology gives machines the ability to learn through speed and repetition. But the harder it is to discern patterns and nuance, the more likely it is for humans to be able to do it. The most unpredictable environments, of course, are those created by other humans, which is why so much human work involves interacting with people. Human work is rooted in our intelligence, our drive, our values, all things that are different than what machines possess. And human work is driven by how we learn. Now, much of the progress in robotics and AI is based on what people sometimes call deep learning. This is a technique, many of you are probably familiar, which describes how machines use algorithmic techniques to methodically drill down into larger and larger data sets. But humans learn in very different ways, what we might call wide learning. And I think this concept of wide learning has three dimensions. One is time, the notion that learning has to take place in a wide time context over the course of people's entire lifetimes, I think is essential to human work. And frankly, it's a virtuous cycle that has to be repeated many times over a worker's life cycle, not simply once early in life. The second dimension of wide learning is the people doing the learning. Human work has to represent a wide range of people, diverse in terms of their race, their ethnicity, their gender, their immigration status, a host of other factors. Human workers, in other words, have to represent the totality of society for all of us to share in the benefits of their human work. And the third dimension is the content of the learning. What people have to learn to be successful in the human work ecosystem represents a wide array of human traits and capabilities. And here we're talking about the breadth of our human traits and capabilities, like compassion, empathy, ethics, collaboration, and analytic reasoning. For wide learning, the content we need to focus on is the skills that human work requires. And as I said earlier, for humans, it matters what we do when we work. It's something that distinguishes us from the machines in a very basic way. Work is and has always been about more than simply collecting a paycheck. People work not only because it helps them economically, but also because it offers them social mobility, personal satisfaction, and at the end of the day, dignity and a sense of self-worth. So, of course, everyone wants to make a living to support themselves and their family, but people also want to apply their unique capabilities to strengthening their communities and helping others. In short, learning matters. Credentials like degrees and certificates are important, but humans want and increasingly will need to rely upon their human traits and capabilities, honed by experience and both informal and formal education over their entire lifetimes to achieve the meaning and purpose they crave as workers. So if you add all of these things together, I think what we're describing is a virtuous cycle of earning, learning, and serving. That's the new paradigm of human work. This has enormous implications for business, for education, and for our societies and citizens. We'll need to urgently answer several key questions, like how should we adapt our education and training systems to the new world of human work? How do we address the racial, ethnic, and other inequities that have plagued our countries for too long? And how do we bring people off the sidelines who've too often been left out, especially when the consequences are increasingly dire? So these are just some of the questions we need to be asking and finding answers for in dialogues like this one. So let me end there and thank you for the opportunity to be with you, and I'm looking forward to the questions and comments.
Thank you, Jamie. I'm glad you mentioned that at the end, because that's where I wanted to begin. We wanted to drill down further into your book, the issues of earning, learning, and serving. Under the context of developing a community, an innovation community, what is it that businesses and educational institutions, how can they work together to create this new work environment for the 21st century? And I'm not only talking about undergraduates and graduate students, but also workers that you mentioned that will be displaced, under this fourth, if you want to call it the fourth technological revolution that we're living in.
Yeah, absolutely. Employers need to understand that the future is about human work. Those tasks that I mentioned that are increasingly going to be performed by machines are not human work. So you have to embrace the diversity of your employees. You have to define the knowledge, skills, and abilities of what your workers need and make sure that your workers can develop their talents throughout their careers. You have to provide more opportunities for your workers to do more that's satisfying in terms of their work. From the worker perspective, I always say workers need to own their learning like people now own their health. They need to know what they know and can do. They need to be able to clearly describe it to their current and potential employers. And they also have to have a strategic plan for building their skills. They can work with their employers on doing that. And from the educator perspective, from the higher ed perspective, I think that we have to put the students at the center of all that we do and focus on their success. We have to make sure that we don't leave these groups, and these vary in different countries, right? We have issues with gender in Greece, for example. We have racial issues in the US. We have different issues in different countries. But the point is that we have to focus on making sure that all workers benefit from this rapidly changing field of work. The educators need to make sure that their students do have credentials that demonstrate what they know and can do. And they have to make sure that their students develop not only the so-called STEM skills, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics skills, but also those human traits and capabilities that I mentioned, the ability to think critically, to be analytical, to solve problems, to be ethical and empathetic and all those things. Those, to me, are the important things that the higher ed sector and the employer sector will need to work on together going forward.
And Jamie, if I may ask you to drill down a little bit further, in the book you mentioned a robust internship program where educational institutions and businesses can work together for the benefit of experience for our students and for developing their skill and talent set. Would you like to discuss or speak to that a little bit more?
Yeah, I think there's several things that we can do. One is internships, right, which is building the opportunity to bring future employees into your into your company or firm early and give them the experience of what it's like working there. And along the way, giving you the ability to assess future talent. So I think that's really important. The second is, look, we need to think at a global scale about the models of apprenticeship and how we can do a better job of apprenticing future workers. Work is changing very rapidly, and we need the people who understand the work of today to bring forward those workers of tomorrow, help them understand that work so that they can bring their abilities and skills to this new world of human work. You know, I have to say here, the US is behind much of Europe in terms of the apprenticeship models. And in particular, I think we need to focus on apprenticeship, not simply as apprenticeship from the perspective of what people used to call the trades, the hands-on fields, but also things that require professional skills and opportunities. So we're seeing growing use of apprenticeships in the business sector, and in finance, for example, in the U.S. We're seeing it in the medical field in a growing sense. And I think those apprenticeships combined with the internships are the hands-on practical experiences that you need to be able to adapt to this rapidly changing work of the future.
If I may, for the last topic of our conversation, switch to or focus on the third element, service. What I found interesting in the book is, how you work in the soft skills that you talked about, but really an ethical society, one built around service and helping build a more robust and fair society and democracy. I would ask you to address that concept of your book as well.
Yeah, I think there's two things that are really important. The first is, and we have very good global data on this point, workers want more than simply to earn a paycheck. In fact, in most countries, even the workers at the bottom, in the bottom quintile of earnings, will say that they will give up money for meaning when it comes to work. They want to be able to contribute to a greater whole. They want to do more than simply take home that paycheck and then go back to work the next week and do it all over again. They actually want to have demonstrate that they are contributing to their communities, to society at large, to something bigger than they are. So that's one point. The second is my observation, which unfortunately is becoming increasingly true around the world, which is that an important reason why we need to make sure that we educate people in this human work sphere is that we know that people with lower levels of educational attainment are actually more susceptible to authoritarianism and more likely to be compelled by these anti-democratic ideas that we see in many parts of the world, including, unfortunately, here in the US. We know that people who develop their critical thinking, their analytic reasoning, their problem solving are not only better contributors to society, as I mentioned, but they're more likely to resist the allure of blaming others, the allure of trying to create change by putting down one part of society to the advantage of another part of society. So, to me, it's very important that, the cradle of democracy, Greece, understands that actually using our educational system to build the active citizenship of our citizens in our countries is extremely important. This is not something that is simply, learning about civics, learning about civic processes, et cetera. This is about being active in your democratic communities and ensuring that you are contributing to the well-being of others. And that starts with a much more robust, deeper system of education.
Jamie, I want to congratulate you on the book. It was very timely. We look forward now with COVID hopefully soon behind us to welcome you back to campus and for us to participate with AmChem and the local community to continue the efforts of Thessaloniki to turn the city into an innovation hub. Thank you for being with us today.
I miss Thessaloniki. I look forward to being back. Thank you so much.